Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here, and I truly appreciate you listening today. If you enjoy the stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's settle in and enjoy today's stories. The low hum of the ship's systems echoed in the quiet control room. I sat in my seat, tapping my fingers against the cold metal armrest, my eyes fixed on the small, pulsating dot on the screen in front of me. That dot, that signal had appeared months ago, a faint blip from a galaxy so distant that it felt impossible. Now, here I was, sitting in the deep silence of space, pulled by its call. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "It's still the same," Maya said, from her station beside me. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the strain in it. No changes in the frequency, no new patterns. I nodded, but my thoughts were far from calm. This mission had brought us into the void, further than anyone had ever gone. And for what? A signal, a single, maddening sound that kept repeating, drawing us in. "What do you make of it, Maya?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed her analysis, but I could see the worry on her face. She stared at the data, like it held a secret she couldn't quite unlock. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "It's not like anything we've seen before. The signal repeats, but there's something off about it. It's not just noise. It feels..." She hesitated, glancing at me like she wasn't sure whether to say the next words aloud. I leaned forward. "What?" "It feels like breathing," she finally whispered. That word, breathing, made my skin crawl. I stared at her, then at the screen again. "Breathing?" I echoed, the word heavy in my mouth. She nodded, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Yeah, the rhythm of it. It's subtle, but it's there. The way it pulses. It's almost like the sound of someone breathing in the dark." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I tried to dismiss it. "That's a stretch, don't you think?" Maya looked at me, her eyes sharp and serious. "Maybe, but I can't shake the feeling that it's alive, or something like alive." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized I felt it too. Space is vast. That's something everyone knows. But until you're out here, truly out here, it's hard to grasp how empty and infinite it feels. We'd left behind the familiar stars, the constellations we grew up recognizing, and now there was nothing. Just a deep, endless blackness, pressing in on all sides. The signal was stronger now, pulling us further from anything remotely recognizable. Days had passed in the ship without incident, or so it seemed. I couldn't shake the strange sensations, cold drafts, flickering lights, and the sound of something faint, like a whisper, just outside the edge of hearing. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Space can play tricks on the mind when you're isolated, surrounded by nothing but the hum of machinery. But when the others started noticing it too, I knew it wasn't just me. Maya was the first to mention it. "Have you noticed how the lights flicker sometimes?" she asked me as we floated through the ship's narrow halls. "Yeah, it's probably a glitch. These systems are old," I said, trying to keep the conversation casual. But I didn't believe my own words. She stopped walking and turned to face me. "It's not just the lights, Elena. It's the air. The way it feels colder in some rooms. The whispers." I froze. "What whispers?" Maya swallowed hard, glancing over her shoulder before looking back at me. "I hear them when I'm alone. It's like something's moving around the ship. I thought it was just my imagination at first, but it's getting louder." I felt my stomach knot. I hadn't told anyone, but I'd heard it too. At night, When the ship was silent, I could swear I heard something moving just beyond the walls, faint voices carrying through the air like echoes from a place we weren't supposed to reach. "We need to check the systems," I said quickly, trying to regain control. "Make sure nothing's malfunctioning." Maya nodded, but the look in her eyes told me she knew this wasn't just a technical problem. Later, in the control room, I tried to focus on the data in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to that signal, pulsing in the background like a heartbeat. Each time it flared up on the screen, I felt a tug deep in my chest, as if something was calling me closer, pulling me into the dark. Dr. Willard Vance, the ship's astrophysicist, had become obsessed with the signal. He spent hours in his lab, studying every pulse, every repetition, convinced there was a message buried within it. I'd tried to talk to him about taking a break, but he brushed me off, his eyes red from lack of sleep, muttering to himself about patterns I couldn't see. "This is incredible," he said to me one day, his voice shaky with excitement. "There's something intelligent behind this signal. I know it. It's not random. It's communication." I frowned. "What kind of communication?" He waved a hand, impatient. "I don't know yet, but it's there. I'm close to figuring it out. Vance, you've barely slept. You're pushing yourself too hard." He shook his head, eyes wide, almost manic. "You don't understand, Elena. This could change everything. This signal, it's ancient, older than our sun, and it's been waiting for someone to hear it." The way he said that sent a chill through me. I didn't like how much he seemed to need to understand it. There was something dangerous in his obsession, like the signal had wormed its way into his mind and wouldn't let go. "I need you to slow down," I said, firmly, crossing my arms. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded, though I could tell he didn't mean it. Yeah, you're right. I'll take a break." But as I turned to leave the lab, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was hidden in that signal, Vance was determined to find it, even if it drove him mad. The ship had gone silent. For the past few days, Maya had stopped talking about the whispers, and Vance was keeping to himself more than ever. I didn't like the quiet. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Malik Ortiz, our roboticist, was the only one who seemed unaffected by the growing tension. He was methodical, always working on the ship's systems, fixing small issues that cropped up. He was the kind of person who found comfort in routines. I envied that. One evening, while I sat alone in the control room, I heard it, for the first time. A faint, low sound, like a breath being drawn in and let out. It wasn't coming from the speakers or any system. It felt like it was coming from the ship itself, vibrating through the walls. I froze, holding my breath, listening. There it was again. Inhale, exhale, slow and deliberate, as though something was lurking just beyond the metal hull, breathing softly in the dark. I stood up, every nerve in my body on edge. The room seemed smaller, suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I moved quickly to the console, checking the systems, looking for an explanation, any sign of malfunction. But everything was fine. The ship was functioning perfectly. I stared at the screen. The signal continued to pulse, steady and unchanging, as if mocking me with its indifference. The breathing stopped. Just as suddenly as it had started, it vanished, leaving only the soft hum of the ship. I sat down, feeling the cold sweat on my skin. I wasn't imagining it. I knew that much now. Whatever was out there, it was close. The next morning, I found Maya sitting at her station, staring blankly at the screen. She hadn't noticed me come in, and when I touched her shoulder, she jumped violently, knocking her headset to the floor. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you." She blinked a few times, as if trying to clear her head. "No, it's fine." Her voice was hollow, and there were dark circles under her eyes. I crouched beside her, picking up the headset. "Are you okay?" Maya didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted back to the screen. "It's been hard to sleep," she finally said. "I keep hearing it." "Hearing what?" "The breathing." My blood ran cold. "You hear it too?" She nodded slowly, her expression distant. "It's getting louder. I can't block it out. I've tried turning off my comms, but it's always there, like it's inside the ship." I glanced around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "It's not just the ship," I muttered. "I've heard it too, and it's getting worse." Maya looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Elena, what if the signal? What if it's not a message? What if it's something else?" I didn't want to consider the possibility, but deep down I knew she was right. The signal wasn't just a call, it was a presence, something we were never meant to find. I found Vance in his lab later that day, hunched over a terminal, muttering to himself. His normally neat workstation was a mess of papers, charts, and equipment. The man I knew as a rational scientist now looked like a wild-eyed fanatic. "Vance," I called softly, but he didn't respond. I stepped closer, and as I did, I noticed something on the screen in front of him. It was the signal, but it had changed. The once steady, pulsing pattern was now erratic, fluctuating wildly, almost as if it were alive, shifting in real time. It no longer seemed random, but purposeful. It felt like communication, but not the kind I'd hoped for. "Vance, what is this?" I asked, alarmed. He turned to me slowly, and when he did, I saw the toll the signal had taken on him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "It's speaking to me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've been listening, and it's starting to make sense." I frowned. "Vance, you need to step away. This signal is—" "No!" He slammed his fist on the desk, startling me. "You don't understand, Elena. This is something ancient, older than anything we've ever known. It's trying to tell us something." I felt a chill spread through me. "What is it saying?" His eyes gleamed with a strange light. "It's showing me the truth. We were never supposed to leave Earth. We've gone too far." Over the next few days, Vance's behavior became more erratic. He refused to leave his lab, and whenever I tried to check on him, he'd yell at me to leave. He wasn't the only one unraveling. Maya's condition worsened. She was barely sleeping, her eyes sunken and hollow, constantly muttering about the breathing that never stopped. Malik, though calm on the outside, had become distant, locking himself in the engine room to run diagnostics that didn't seem necessary. The tension in the ship was suffocating, and the signal, its pulse, its presence, was now so strong that I felt it every waking moment, as if it were burrowing into my mind. I'd started to dream about it too. In my dreams, I was floating in the void, surrounded by darkness, the signal echoing all around me, and always, in the distance, there was something moving, something massive and ancient, waiting for us to come closer. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore. One night, as I walked down the darkened corridor toward my quarters, I heard it. Not just the breathing, but something else, something moving in the walls. It was soft at first, a faint, scraping sound, like claws dragging against metal. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened, straining to hear. There it was again, A scraping, a slow, deliberate movement just beyond the bulkhead. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and the lights above flickered briefly before going out completely, plunging me into darkness. I turned to run, but the sound followed me, closer now, faster. My mind screamed that there was something behind me, something I couldn't see but knew was there. I raced down the corridor, the walls seeming to close in, my own footsteps echoing louder and louder until... The lights flickered back on. I stumbled, falling to the floor, gasping for breath. I looked around, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the cold, sterile corridor stretching out in front of me. But I knew I wasn't alone. The next day, I gathered the crew in the control room. Maya sat huddled in her chair, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. Malik leaned against the wall, his face expressionless, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Vance wasn't there. He hadn't left his lab in days, and I wasn't sure if he ever would again. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's happening to the ship. We've all felt it. The breathing, the sounds. It's not our imagination." Maya looked up, her eyes wide and terrified. "It's inside the ship, Elena. It's everywhere." Malik nodded slowly. "I've been checking the systems. Everything's normal, but I've heard it too." I swallowed hard. "Whatever it is, it's connected to the signal. We need to shut it down." Maya shook her head violently. We can't get rid of it. It's too late." "What do you mean?" She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a signal. It's alive." I knew then that there was no escaping it. The signal wasn't just a message or a call. It was a presence, something vast and unknowable, something that had been waiting for us. And now, we had brought it into our world. I went to Vance's lab one last time. The door slid open, and the room was dark. I could barely make out his figure hunched over the console, muttering to himself. The signal was blaring from the speakers now, louder than ever, a constant, pulsating rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Vance," I said, stepping inside, "we have to stop this." He didn't respond. I moved closer, and that's when I saw it. He was gone, not physically but mentally. His eyes were wide open, staring at the screen, but there was nothing behind them. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The signal had taken him. I turned off the console. The signal stopped. The room fell silent, but the breathing didn't. It was louder now. All around me, the sound of something ancient, something beyond comprehension, breathing in the dark. I backed away, my heart racing, but I knew there was no escape. We had gone too far. The ship drifted in silence, lost in the abyss. The signal was gone, but the presence remained. In the cold, empty halls, the sound of breathing echoed forever. We weren't the first. That was the one thing I knew when we set off, even if no one would admit it. There had been other missions to this distant part of the universe, missions that had all gone dark. No signals, no traces, no wreckage, just silence. The idea that ships and their crews could vanish without a trace gnawed at me as we sped through the void. Our ship, the Valiant, was the best of its kind, equipped with cutting-edge technology designed for deep space exploration. And yet, despite the advanced systems, the feeling of unease clung to all of us. There was something wrong with the mission from the start, something they weren't telling us. I tried to shake off the nerves as I sat at my station, watching the stars blur into streaks of light on the ship's screens. Captain Dominic Carr was focused, as usual, his eyes sharp as he monitored the navigation systems. He was a no-nonsense leader, and he'd kept us steady through training. But out here, in the dark between the stars, I could see the tension in his jaw. "We're nearing the boundary," Callie Reeves, our navigator, said. Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly composed herself. The boundary, the edge of known space, where maps faded into uncertainty, was where things started to get strange. Something no one could explain had been detected out here. A gravitational anomaly, pulling on distant objects, something beyond black holes or collapsed stars. We had been sent to investigate, and the silence from the previous missions hung over us like a shadow. "Everything looks normal for now," Callie added, her fingers dancing over the controls. I wasn't so sure. It started with the glitch in the scanners. We had been traveling for what felt like days when the first anomaly appeared on the ship's radar. A sharp, sudden blip, followed by nothing. Just one small speck on an otherwise empty screen. "What the hell was that?" I muttered under my breath. "I'm not sure," Callie said, adjusting the scanners. "It could have been a small asteroid. Debris, maybe. But it wasn't debris. I knew that much. The blip had appeared too suddenly, too cleanly, and then it was gone. And it wasn't long after that the glitches started spreading. First, it was the navigation systems. Every few hours, there would be a strange distortion in the data. Coordinates shifted, distances blurred. We'd be locked on course, and then suddenly we'd be a few degrees off without any explanation. Captain Carr had the technicians check and recheck the systems, but there was nothing wrong with the hardware. "It's like something's pulling at the ship," Malik Qasim, our chief engineer, said quietly. "But we're not in any gravitational field strong enough to cause it." I didn't like where his thoughts were headed. The glitches became more frequent. Radar signals would spike without warning, picking up strange readings that disappeared as quickly as they came. I began to feel like something was watching us, something just outside the reach of our senses, toying with us, making itself known in subtle, unnerving ways. The first to disappear was Lara, our communications officer. It didn't make any sense. One minute, she was sitting at her station, monitoring the various signals coming in and out of the ship, and the next, she was just gone. I was there when it happened. I had looked over at her, asking something about a minor radar spike. She had just turned to respond when her face froze, her expression twisting into something I still can't describe, like she saw something that terrified her. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Her chair was empty. No sound, no sign of struggle. I stared at the empty seat, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't move. "Lara!" I called out, my voice shaking. "Lara!" Captain Carr rushed to the comm station, but there was no trace of her, not a sound. We searched the ship from top to bottom, every room, every corridor. It was as if Lara had been erased from existence. "Where the hell could she have gone?" Malik whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "She was right here," I said, still staring at the empty chair. "She didn't move. She didn't leave." The ship's cameras showed nothing. 1 second Lara was there. The next, she was gone. Just like that. "We need to stay calm," Captain Carr said. But even his voice betrayed the terror creeping in. "There has to be an explanation." But there wasn't. Something had taken Lara. Something unseen. And we had no idea when it would strike again. After Lara's disappearance, the tension on the ship became unbearable. No one said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Who would be next? The atmosphere on the Valiant changed. It wasn't just the constant glitches, the strange radar readings, or the sudden coldness that seemed to seep into the air. There was something more sinister, something alive. It started with the shadows. I saw it first while passing through one of the corridors late at night. The lights flickered, just for a second, and that's when I saw it. A figure, just a silhouette, standing at the end of the hall, unmoving, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the lights, just my mind playing games. But then Malik saw it too, and Callie, and soon the whole crew was seeing them. Dark shapes slipping through the edges of our vision, vanishing the moment we turned to look. "They're not hallucinations," Callie said one night, her voice low, eyes haunted. "They're real." "Don't talk like that," Captain Carr snapped, though I could tell he was just as scared as the rest of us. "It's some kind of optical illusion. Space can play tricks on the mind." But none of us believe that. Not anymore. A week after Lara's disappearance, we received a transmission. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from anywhere we recognized. The message was garbled, distorted beyond comprehension, but it had come from the region we were investigating, the anomaly. The captain played it over and over, trying to make sense of the strange, eerie sounds. The words, if they were even words, were in a language none of us had heard before. But there was something familiar about the pattern. It was like the transmission was mimicking our own communications, but off, like it had been scrambled by something ancient. "We need to respond," Malik said. "Maybe they can help us." Captain Carr hesitated. "We don't know what we're dealing with. If this is from the other ships, then they need our help," Malik insisted. "We can't ignore this." We sent out a signal in response. For a few long, tense hours, there was nothing but silence. Then finally, a reply came through. The garbled message returned, but this time it was clearer. And what we heard chilled us to the bone. The message wasn't asking for help. It was a warning. The distorted voice crackling through the speakers spoke in broken phrases, but we managed to piece it together. "Do not continue. It watches. It feeds." The words made my skin crawl. Something out there was watching us, and it had been waiting. Callie was the first to speak after the transmission ended. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It's a trap," Captain Carr said, his voice cold. "We've walked right into something we don't understand." Malik shook his head, his hands gripping the console. "We need to get out of here. Now." But it wasn't that simple. The anomaly, the very thing we had been sent to investigate, was now exerting its pull on us. The glitches in our navigation systems had grown worse, and now, no matter what we tried, we couldn't change course. It was as though the ship itself had been caught in an invisible web, slowly being drawn deeper into the unknown. "We're trapped," Callie whispered, her face pale. "We're trapped out here." And the worst part, the shadows were getting closer. The shadows no longer waited in the corners of our vision. They were bolder now, moving through the corridors, appearing even when we looked directly at them. There were no more flickering lights to hide behind. They were real. They were here. One night, I woke up to the feeling of something cold against my skin. I opened my eyes, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was a figure. It wasn't like the shadows we had seen before. This one had form. Its body was humanoid, but it was wrong. Its limbs too long, its eyes too dark, as though it had been shaped from the void itself. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. And then, just as silently as it had appeared, it melted into the darkness, leaving me gasping for breath. The next morning, I told Captain Carr what I had seen. He didn't doubt me. None of us doubted each other anymore. The creatures, whatever they were no longer content to remain unseen. They were coming for us. As the days passed, the crew began to unravel. Callie stopped sleeping altogether, her eyes wide and bloodshot as she paced the ship, muttering to herself. Malik had locked himself in the engine room, convinced he could somehow break free from the anomaly's pull. But every attempt had failed. Captain Carr tried to keep order, but even he was losing control. The weight of what was happening, of the shadows, of the warnings, was too much. He had stopped giving commands, stopped trying to calm the crew. Now, he just sat in the control room, staring at the endless void outside. And I could feel it too. The presence. It was always there, just beyond the edges of perception, pressing in on us. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It had become a prison, and we were its captives. In the end, it wasn't an attack that took us. It wasn't some violent, sudden event. It was slow, creeping. One by one, the crew disappeared. Malik was the next to go, vanishing from the engine room without a trace. Then Callie, found dead in her quarters, her face frozen in terror. I was the last. The shadows circled closer, their whispers filling the ship. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ship had become part of the anomaly, part of the endless void. And as I stood in the control room, waiting for the end, I heard the voice again, the same warning we had ignored. Do not continue. It watches. It feeds. I realized then that we had never stood a chance. The thing out there, in the darkness between the stars, had been waiting for us. It was ancient, patient, and now it had us. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was the sound of breathing, deep, slow, and all around me. The Valiant drifted silently through the void, its crew gone, its systems dead. And in the vast, empty spaces between the stars, something watched, something fed, and it waited for the next ship to come. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you've heard and want to hear more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate your support.